The Jim and Terry Show without the Jim this week. Jim, happy holidays, smooth sailing, driving, lighthouse keeping, watching, touring, whatever it is that you're doing. I just trust you'll have a restful couple of weeks. The Jim and Terry Show solo podcast for the next several podcasts. What is in my craw? What is under my hat? What is up my sleeves? What has got into my sense of wellness? What has got me disturbed? It'd be nice to carry on a facade, a shtick like Alex Jones. Jim does a very good imitation. Alex Jones, yeah. Testosterone are us. Maybe even steroids are us. Or maybe it's male rage are us. Whatever it is in Alex Jones' craw, he happens to love Pierre Poilievre. And I gotta say, you can tell a lot about people by the company they keep. And if Pierre Poilievre does not distance himself from Alex Jones, perhaps you got a problem, Pierre Poilievre. And perhaps you have a problem if you hang out at Diagolon Trailers. Diagolon. Ah, yes, the far-right extremists, violent domestic terrorists. I don't know if I'd go that so far as to say that, but they're certainly on a watch list. And when Pierre Poilievre is seen and depicted in video excerpts coming out and talking about Diagolon and about doing a good job, yeah, everybody likes you. No, not speaking on behalf of Canadians, at least not the ma and pa Canadians that you claim to represent, not the working class Canadians you tend to say that you represent. Pierre Poilievre, Mr. Slogan, he's been campaigning for an election that he's tried to snap call on how many times, trying to defeat and overturn the government for the past, well, it's got to be nearly 2 years since he was selected, or was that manipulated into the leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada? Speaking of Canada, things seem to be taking a turn in the world of comedy and their view of Canada. I use for evidence Bill Maher, who just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago was it, said something like this, and I found a fellow who sort of represents my way of thinking. Bill Maher, what are you thinking when you deliberately misrepresent things for a point of comedy, for a few laughs? Okay, I get the idea. Yeah, Canada, maybe hockey and toques or something, and skating. Maybe you don't like that kind of stuff. But he says he does. But then why would you say stuff that is not true? At least not completely true, and misleading and misrepresenting, which makes Bill Maher guilty of manipulating things for a laugh. Not the first comedian to have done it, but really, Bill Maher, I mean, he used to be one of my heroes. And I loved the show Irreligulous. Religulous? Irreligulous. I don't know what it is. But it was attacking all forms of faith as magical thinking. And I sort of understand that kind of thing too. But you can go too far in comedy. And here's an example.
Begin.
And finally, new rule: if we want to save our country, we should follow the advice good liberals have given for decades and learn from other countries. Especially those beacons of progressivism like Canada, England, and Scandinavia. And I agree we should, as long as we're honest about the lessons we're learning, and as long as we're up to date on the current data, such as the unemployment rate in the U.S. is 3.8%, and in Canada it's 6.1%.
All right, so the unemployment rate. This is calculated in two different ways in the U.S.
All right, this fellow that I found is his, I'm going to put a link in the description, The Rational National. The fellow seems to have it parsed the way I would, broken down into comedic chunks. So his first stab at Canada and Canadian culture is that the liberals of the United States used to look north, and when Trump was elected, many liberals said, well, we're going to look for property and real estate up in Canada because we don't want to live here under Trump anymore. And so we sort of represented an ideal. And I'm wondering to what extent that is true anymore, or is Bill Maher on the take from conservatives? articulating points. He seems to be on a bit of a bent of the last 6 months or so. Don't follow him as much as I used to. And that's because he seems to be going to the right. Bill Maher to the right. He's no longer woke left. He's anti-left, anti-woke. I don't know to what extent that may be true, but this one of statistics. Canada's unemployment rate considerably higher than the Americans. But this analysis goes on to look at the statistics and the way that Canada measures unemployment versus the way Americans measure unemployment. It's worth a listen to. So here we go. Just a first point.
US and in Canada. First, let me show you this example. This is from 2012, so ignore the actual data here, but look at the differences. So Canada, the blue line, the official rate at the time in 2012 was at 7.4. If Canada used the US methodology, it would be even lower at 6.3. The reason for this is how these surveys are conducted. So to be clear, the unemployment rate is not conducted or not decided based upon actual government data. It's decided based on surveys. So Miles Korak here, who is the professor of economics at the Graduate Center in New York, he breaks it down in this piece discussing how the U.S. makes a distinction between job search activities that involve active measures as opposed to passive measures. In the U.S., only active measures will lead to someone being designated as unemployed. In Canada, either type of activity will do the trick. The crux of the matter...
Okay, to stop it there and take a look at it. The way we gather data. So it's not, as I often say, show me the data. It's not just the data. You have to understand how data is collected. In this case, it's surveys. It's not government reporting. It is surveys of people. And we all know about surveys and about polls and how unreliable they are as methodologically sound. Is that right? Maybe there's a different adjective or adverb for it. They're not sound. So you got to know that there's a difference between passive and active. You probably know that. Active, you're actually doing something to solve your unemployment. And you are reporting for Unemployment Canada. You're attending work fairs. You're doing all kinds of things to get yourself out there and back into the workforce. Whereas passive means you can sit at home, say that you're going through a newspaper, and claim that as evidence of being unemployed. Yeah, it leads to some vastly different numbers, a few percentage points, which would mean Canada's unemployment rate in relation to its actively seeking population is about the same as the Americans' actively seeking population. So it's not as big a deal as Bill Maher makes it sound. What about other things? Smoke pollution, air pollution? That kind of got me. And that was the one that got me onto this topic right away. Here it goes.
Actually going on. On to the next clip.
And of the 15 North American cities with the worst air pollution, 14 are in Canada.
All right.
14 are in Canada, he says, and that is a bit of a problem. 14. If you remember last summer, it was this summer of endless forest fires in Alberta, BC, northern Saskatchewan. It was a summer of smog being seen in Ontario, 1,000 kilometers away. It was a summer in which I did not even light a fire in the backyard to enjoy the campfire of the summer, Canadian pastime, because not only were there fire bans, but the smoke was visible, even in Ontario. So, yeah, 14 out of 15, 16 out of 17 of the most cities, communities registering air pollution that was worth noting and was noted in many international reports. Yeah, they were in Canada, but the context was they were forest fires, not to be confused with air pollution from smokestacks, from lack of regulation and spewing particles into the atmosphere because you don't have regulations. The EPA was decimated under Trump, and Harper did similar things, rolling back regulations on industry during his years. So what is all this? It is simply conservative talking points, which I'm really surprised Bill Maher, a woke lefty, is guilty of. But there you have it. Context matters. Data matters. Getting the stuff, just the numbers, is irrelevant when you frame it incorrectly. Yes, absolute numbers, Canada had more air pollution in more cities than any other country in the world last summer. And yet, we had forest fires that would cover over half the size of Germany. That's an explanation. It's not an excuse. It's not to say it's poor policy. It's not to say we're not trying. It's not to say that we don't have legislation. We do, and we are. Canada still ranks up there with the cleanest air quality of any country in the world, unless it's a fire season, unless it's one of the worst forest fire seasons we've had. Now, of course, there are other things that Bill Maher goes on to rant about. And one of the things he rants on about is housing, that Canada has a housing shortage. Canada has too many immigrants. And he went on to use some statistics that talked about Canada's housing crisis. And it's true, there is a housing shortage, largely brought about by having an immigration policy that was pretty much open doors. And we can debate the value of immigration and the numbers that should or could be more reasonable. Perhaps there's some argument there. You can banter back and forth about what numbers Canada is capable of housing. Housing. Not all immigrants come with a need to have a separate home or a separate abode, a separate dwelling. Some come on a family pass, which means they're going to live together. So there's one dwelling needed for a family as opposed to multiple. So we got to keep an eye on how short our housing stock is. And of course, we need to understand that housing is a provincial responsibility, not a federal one. So you can rant all you want about Canada, but the housing responsibility is really the provincial jurisdiction. So how's that going, Premier Ford in Ontario? How's that going, Danielle Smith in Alberta? How's that going, Scott Moe in Saskatchewan? How's it going with your social housing? Social housing, where the government kicks in to assist in the building, development, and rent of these dwellings. Multiplexes, quadrupleplexes, quadplexes, sixplexes. Are we getting there, or are we building these multi-million-dollar giant homes? What is the need of our population? I'll give you a hint. It's not in the mega homes. It's not in the big new brands, new subdivisions, where we're taking public lands and giving them to developers. Flato, are you listening? Flato, big developer in Ontario, given money, given land from Ford to develop. It's not all cricket in Ontario.